Okay, just going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody, or someone could actually confirm that they can see my screen okay.
Hi,
Yes.
Graham. Tracy here from FSAG.
Yes,
I can see your screen.
Brilliant, fantastic. Okay, that's that hurdle over. Brilliant. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for the intro, Muku. That's fantastic. A slight addition to that. We also do have a colleague of mine, Anya, who's going to support us with for two reasons. One, otherwise you'll just have me droning on about things for the next whatever, and myself and Paul Shayshaft. We've got Anya joining us, who will be talking about specifically POPI and GDPR. Just thought I'd add that in. Okay, let me just get my screen sorted out. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover off today. I know we just explained it, but I'll just go through what we're going to cover off. Just going to cover a little bit about who are Proceed, if you don't know who we are. I'm then going to talk about SAP ILM and IQ, and then we're going to talk a bit about moving to HANA or the cloud, or just moving off what you're moving from to something else. And then we're going to have a little bit of a deep dive into SAP ILM GDPR. That's really POPI from your perspective. That's going to be covered off by Anya. And then we're going to fall into content management and extended ECM with Paul, and vendor invoice management. And then we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. But just so the day or the session sort of provides some interaction, because normally we would be doing this in an auditorium. At certain points within the presentation, if you've got a question, use the feedback, not the feedback box. There's a way that you can, let's see if I can show you. You can use the comments, and you can feed comments back or chat back to Michelle. Or I may even well stop and just ask if anybody's got any questions. So if you open up your mic, and if you've got a question, just ask the question. It just might make the session a little bit more interactive. So without further ado, I shall continue on. Okay, so who are Proceed Group? So Proceed Group, we're an SAP Gold partner. We've been doing archiving and decommissioning with SAP for about 20+ years. We're in 7 countries, and we've got offices in most of the geographical locations as in continent-wise. We're headquartered in obviously in the United Kingdom. We've got 600+ customers. Traditional data management, we do about 300+, and then we're doing a lot of HANA migrations, as you expect now. We've got 200+ customers. We've been doing HANA migrations around the world. We're the supplier of choice for document data management, including SAP ILM. We actually have more consultants that do SAP archiving using ILM than SAP have. We're a partner with OpenText, and that's what we're going to touch on, extended ECM and other aspects of content management. And there's a list of some of the partners. We have some smaller partners as well, but they're the list of the major partners we work with: OpenText, Virtustream, Microsoft, etc., etc. So yeah, so we're very embedded into all those types of organizations. This is just examples of some of the customers we work with. You may have heard of them, you may not have heard of them, but this is the sort of the clientele we work with. And I think the other stat that we have is that we've worked with of the top 100 SAP customers, we've worked with at least 25 of those SAP customers. So we've got a reasonably good experience within this space, and specifically in archiving, nothing else. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about SAP ILM, Information Lifecycle Management, and specifically just to explain the functionality and what SAP ILM does for you out of the box. Okay, so I'll just touch on where it came from. So SAP ILM comes from the base tool set that it uses is SAP data archiving. So it was initially created for data volume management, i.e. reducing the size of the database, and that was its an original requirement, make the systems smaller. But as it's grown, it's then started to talk about retention management. So this is what we call end of life. So this is where your data, you've archived it, but now you've archived it, you only want to keep it for a specific amount of time due to regulatory requirements, i.e. 7-10 years, depending on where you are. So they introduced retention management. So that meant that it would only keep your data for a specific amount of time. Then the next part was end of life of systems. So this is when they introduced tooling within ILM to enable you to decommission old SAP systems or old legacy SAP systems, i.e. they've gone to their end of life, we've moved to a new shiny new system, but we created a legacy system which we still need the data in it, but we didn't move it into the productive system. So therefore we wanted to, it then provides the functionality for end of life, so you can keep the data in a less expensive solution than keeping the old solution and the old system's lights on. You might have burning platforms it's running on, etc., etc. And then the final step was landscape harmonization. So this covered off a number of things. One, they wanted to make sure that everything was all in one package, but also it provided the additional requirements for additional requirements for GDPR, etc., etc. So the whole package was expanded and provide additional functionality, as well as doing non-SAP as well. So we could then decommission non-SAP systems into a SAP ILM. So it became a bigger and larger package. So that was the evolution of SAP ILM. So from that, we have the decommissioning house, as we call it, or decommissioning house, the information lifecycle management house, with basically 3 pillars. Like I said earlier, data archiving, which is still there. You can still do data archiving. You don't need to use SAP ILM to do that. That's standard out of the box with SAP for your data volume management, i.e. pulling data out. You then have retention management, which is probably the purest way, is using SAP ILM, i.e. to support and manage and keep your data for as long as you need to keep it. And then the last part is system decommissioning. So this is both legacy and SAP systems being decommissioned to a single solution. So the aim is the fact is that when you're using SAP ILM, you have all your data in one place being managed by one single solution with lifecycle management. So all your retention policies are all set up for all the data in your organization, and it all resides in one place. That would be the optimal way of doing it. I only know of a few customers around the world who have done that, but the aim is that that's what the tool is there for. So that's the essence of what SAP Information Lifecycle Management is. So what do we talk about with lifecycle management? What does the NetWeaver Information Lifecycle Management give us? So there's sort of three steps, obviously, of any life cycle within your organization. Obviously it gets created, and during that process you're going to be updating it, changing it, etc., etc. And then at some point you're going to have what's called a residency time. So your data has become business complete, which is very important with SAP archiving. Things don't get archived unless they're business complete. And then it hits what you would term as your residency time. And then you move it off into your archive and your file storage system. And then at that point, when it's within your file storage system, you can access it for specific information for your audits, which will happen on a regular basis. Potential lawsuits, i.e. somebody's asked for some information specific to some litigation. And then the final part is the information is destructed based on the retention time that you have defined. So axis of frequency, obviously there, we've just got you've got peaks and troughs as regards to what you need that data for, but that's sort of the general life cycle. Now, obviously what to support that, we need residency times, we need retention times, we need destruction dates, and i.e. when data can be destroyed, and based on what date is it based on that we destroy it? Is it destroyed on the creation date? Is it destroyed on the completion date? There's all sorts of things that you have to set up to agree those. And then obviously exception handling is what we call as legal cases or case management. So what happens there is that you've got a specific reason that you have to keep the keep the data. Now, what you can use ILM to do is you can say, okay, we're going to keep the data until that lawsuit or that case has completed, and then you may keep it for a number of years after that. So you can use ILM to segregate that information, essentially supersede the retention period of how long that data should be kept for, and it is then kept for an extended period of time, and any extended period of time after the case is completed. So it can become very, very valuable in that situation, so you don't get yourself into trouble by deleting data that you shouldn't, and that's the key at the end of the day. So again, just talking about the information retention manager. So this is the tools which are used to enforce the retention and the expiration of data. The important thing about that is the fact is that, like I was saying earlier, when you've applied your retention policy, that policy can vary from data type to data type. We don't have one retention policy. You have many retention policies. You may have a different one for finance data, to procurement data, to payroll data. So therefore, and obviously again, for maybe even shorter for things like application change logs, etc., making them even shorter. So to manage and enforce these retention policies, you have to set the policies up to apply those retention and to how long you're going to retain the data for, and also, like I said earlier, when can you destroy the data. And the process is quite simple. You're running your archiving jobs within your production system. It then pulls the data down into SAP ILM. It applies the retention dates or the residency dates for that data and the trigger dates, and then you'll be running jobs within ILM itself, and it will tell you, okay, this week or this month we're going to delete this data because it's become eligible for deletion. You can look at that, you can change that, you can decide I want to keep it for a bit longer. There's all sorts of controls you can manage within there. So it's very, very cleverly built that you can always put an extra layer of checks before you delete any data. You can maintain separate archives with different retention periods, so you can have multiple archiving areas with different expiry dates. So you can obviously break the data down to archive data differently. And the other thing I'll just touch on is, and I'll talk about it in a bit later on, it's quite clever in the way that it archives the data. It doesn't just archive one table at a time with one retention policy. Each of the archive objects, or the data is archived, it's packaged together. So all the referential data that is needed to support the data is archived together. So therefore, if you have different retention policies for different types of data, but they are dependent on each other, that data will be held for the duration for the longest retention policy. So i.e., if you have some data which is needed for 10 years, but the original data was only needed for 7, that other data will be kept for 10 years because you've got to keep the referential data, referential integrity of the data that you're going to retrieve. Hope that makes sense. And then we can obviously perform any discoveries, which I was talking about, legal holds, etc., and obviously the legal hold piece as well. So there's plenty of functionality within ILM. Okay, so I'm going to show you a visualization of how SAP ILM interacts with SAP. So in this example, I've got a document sitting down here, and I've got a piece of data which is created and placed into your main storage. Okay, and over time that data becomes eligible for archiving. So the first thing that we would do is we would move potentially the document into something which is OpenText or some certified data management like SAP IQ. We would then archive the data. Now the data is archived. Like I said, it's pulled out into what's called ADK files, and as it's pulled out, the retention policy is applied depending on what record type. And I think the important thing that I was want to show here is the fact is that the data, once it's moved in, this is a piece of data, it's reattached to its document within the certified document management. So therefore, later on, you can still retrieve that document related to that data. So at this point, how do you get at the data? So the data's in SAP ILM. How do you get at it? You can do local reporting directly out of ILM, not necessarily the most optimal way of doing it. You can do SAP queries as well using SQVI, etc., to get information out. And the route that most customers require is you can access the data through the standard SAP transaction. Not all, but most SAP transactions have got some sort of archive enablement, or there is an alternative way to get at that data. If not, there's obviously tools you can create to do that. So you can always get at the information. It's never gone. I mean, with customers, we tend not to try and talk too much about archiving. We talk about data management, because archiving is, oh, we're going to put it into a box and we're going to stick it in a cupboard somewhere and we'll never ever see it again. It's not the same. You can still get the information, is always there until it reaches its retention period, and then it's finally deleted. So that's the way the process works. Okay. So it might be an opportunity time. Has anybody got any questions specific about how SAP ILM archives data or manages data? Okay, I shall carry on. So actually, this is quite a good opportunity to help you understand how we link things into something like OpenText. I know we've got Paul Shakeshaft on the call at the moment. So this is just really providing you the layers that you build as regards to SAP ILM. Okay, there's a number of components within there, within the NetWeaver ILM and WebDAV interface. Now the WebDAV interface is very important because that provides the information to the worm type storage of how long the data should be kept, so you can't accidentally delete it. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So we have, I mean, I can cover off all the lists. We have audit area management. We've talked about that. We have policy engine, so managing policies and rules, import export rules. So we've got an engine in there. We've got ILM enhanced archiving programs and functions. So that's where you can integrate that into solutions, and also you can automate a rule-based archiving. So it's all that's in there. Destroy functions, obviously database archive and attachments. So it doesn't just do the data. If there's any attachments related to that data, that will also be destroyed. Case management, I was talking about that as regards to legal holds on data, etc., etc. And then like I said, the WebDAV interface and the ILM interface, which connects the storage to secure legally compliant retention of data. So that's what I was saying earlier. So what that helps, or that's what this creates, is when the data is stored into any ILM certified storage, the WebDAV interface places controls on that data that will prevent it from being accidentally deleted if someone was able to log on to that server. So ILM certified storage enforces obviously retention hold. Paul, are you on the call at all? It's gone quiet. I didn't know whether you wanted to jump in and just explain a little bit about ILM certified storage.
No, other than to say that ILM has a number of storage solutions certified. The two we typically use would be OpenText and SAP IQ, but there are a number of others.
Okay.
They're all listed on the SAP website if people need to check.
Brilliant. Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Paul. So yeah, so we essentially you can connect to essentially anything. We'd always say connect to something which is certified. If it's not, if you run into problems, you're not going to be getting any support from SAP. Okay. So has anybody got any specific questions about ILM themselves, ILM itself? Anybody? Michelle, has anybody asked any specific questions before I move on?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, not at the moment. Thanks, Graham.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So what I'm going to talk about now is, and I think this is probably the big conversation starter, or the big conversation at the moment, is moving to HANA and or the cloud. Now, I know we've done previous sessions which talk about right sizing and all those type of activities. What I really wanted to touch on in this process is just to help you understand where ILM can help and support that journey to either to HANA and or the cloud. So it's just really just you understand where it fits into that process. So this is just an attempt to sort of create a timeline for a typical sort of large organization and its life cycle through its enterprise solutions that it's been using. So this is just to provide you sort of a conversation as regards to where this would potentially fit in within your organization. You know, back in the 80s, large global company using Oracle systems on a human capital management, so specifically just using on HR, and then it moves into, it builds a factory system in 1990 on IBM, and then it buys a company, acquires a company which has got Oracle and JD Edwards, and then gets a Microsoft system for regulatory subsidy, and then it acquires another system, etc. So all this tail that's been created over time. Now we want to move to cloud, or we might want to use to S4 HANA in the cloud. So there's, we may want to move to the HEC, the enterprise SAP HANA enterprise cloud solution, etc. So there's lots of future. What's our future's going to be? So there's all this lovely future, but we've got this tail, and we've got to bring the tail along. There may be data that we need to keep. You know, certainly if you're in a you know, airline industry or a regulatory industry like financial services or pharmaceuticals, there's a lot of data you have to keep forever. So you've got to consider, what do I do with that data? So you know, information like lifecycle management in every organization, large or small, looking at there's lots of good business reasons to using SAP ILM. So like we always talked about earlier, managing your database total cost of ownership and performance. So, you know, we've got an example here where you can save money just by archiving and reducing the size of your database. It's nothing to do with moving it. You're just managing the size of your database by archiving and using ILM. So it's just improving the performance. Migration to OnSuite on HANA, to Suite on HANA, or S4 migration. So like I was saying earlier, if you're planning to move, sorry, did someone want to ask a question then? Oh, okay, sorry. If you're planning to move there, you may want to right size, you may want to reduce the size of your system because HANA can be very expensive, and you and manage it also once you're on HANA. SAP ILM provides you with that capability. So it's another useful tool. Landscape simplification. So that's why I'm talking about, you know, reducing the running cost of having legacy systems, SAP or non-SAP. You know, sitting there, taking up time, effort to manage. Sorry, if you're not talking, can you go on mute, please? Because a little bit of background noise there. Thank you.
Graham, we have a question. If you've got.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. contract management is the contract pulled from ECM or from SAP repository.
Sorry, so I didn't quite catch that. Sorry.
Contract management.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Do you mean contact management, Brian? I'm not sure. Contract management is the contract pulled from ECM or from the SAP repository.
Yes, I mean the contract here, the document itself.
So
Okay.
Paul, you might be able to help me with that one. I think we build that relationship between the original data and the original document, if it be a contract. So if there's a link, it will be retrieved and can be retrieved together from the archive. Paul, do you want to just confirm that?
Yes, the contract, wherever you have that configured to be stored in the system, whether that's in an SAP content repository or in extended ECM, it is pulled back from its current location. Within ILM, we don't duplicate the data. We literally reference the link to where it's currently stored, and we can manage the destruction of it where it's currently stored.
Or it doesn't matter where it sits.
It doesn't matter where it sits, as long as it's connected to the SAP system, so it's in an SAP content repository, or it's in extended ECM, then we can reference that and manage the destruction within the ILM arena.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
No problem. So landscape simplification, which is obviously talking about the tail. So that's bringing the tail forward, i.e. taking it off old technology, putting it on newer technology. You can renegotiate your contract because you no longer need to support those old databases, burning platforms, all those type of things. So it reduces your total cost of ownership there. And then obviously we touch on GDPR compliance. So there's a lot of, we'll be touching on in a bit more detail of how SAP's SAP ILM can deal with specific POPI requirements, i.e. Deletion of personal information, identification of personal information, etc., etc. And then other compliances we have also, you know, it may not apply, but obviously Sarbanes-Oxley, which is obviously something that came along in the US. There's obviously additional regulatory requirements coming out all the time. So SAP have done a lot of work to keep ILM to support and manage those important regulatory requirements. So I was going to give you some examples. So we're potentially just going to touch on 3 different scenarios. So and how SAP ILM can help with those 3 scenarios. So data protection, privacy protection. There we go. GDPR, even for end of purpose, and the right to be forgotten. So it deals with all those new regulatory requirements we have for general data protection. Archiving of data with retention management. So this is talking about, okay, we need data and we need to keep it for a specific amount of time. We don't want to keep it any longer because that can create risk if you keep data for too long. It deals with that scenario too. And then the final one is obviously system decommissioning. So that's taking old data, old systems, non or SAP systems, and move them into a solution. And then the first 2 specifically are we can continue to support with OpenText in the cloud, outside the cloud, etc., etc. And when I talk about cloud here, and when I go through the other slides, that doesn't have to be in the cloud. It can be on-prem. It can be in your own data centers. It's not specific to the cloud. So I'm going to go through these 3 scenarios I just wanted to explain to you, and why we would always recommend you to use SAP ILM. So this is what's called a brownfield. Now, a brownfield scenario, in my terms, is the fact is that you are moving an entire system from your current data center into a new system, any database, i.e. you could be going to HANA, you could be going to Business Suite on HANA, or you could just be moving it to a newer version of SAP. Yeah, you doesn't have to be HANA itself. And it doesn't have to be in the cloud. You could also be moving it into your own data center, as it shows there, or you could move it into the cloud as well. So the original state here, you've got your SAP, your current operational data identified in yellow, and then you've got your old non-operational data below. So what we would say is, let's move your non-operational data out of your operational system and move it into the ILM archive. Now, this is obviously quite an optimal time to think about, okay, well, actually, why don't we move it into something in the cloud at that point? So you put your archive data, your low usage data. It's not accessed very often, like we explained earlier. It might be only accessed once a year from audits, etc. You've moved it into the cloud. The cloud is a consumption-based model. If you don't use it, you don't pay for it. So therefore, it fits quite nicely in there. Don't have to do that, but it could be an optimal way of doing it. And then the final part is obviously, if you then decide that you want to move everything out into your new data center or into the cloud, you have the opportunity that now you can reconnect it. So essentially, ILM archive sits there, and then you move the remaining SAP system or whatever it is into there. Okay, so that's an NEDB brownfield. S/4HANA, similar process. So you're going for the same process, but at the end of the day, you want to move your SAP system into a HANA system. Same process again. You take out your old operational data, i.e. you right size it before you move to HANA. You moved your operational data into an ILM system, SAP ILM, and that could be in the cloud, doesn't have to be. And then the second part is you're then migrating your SAP, existing SAP system into a HANA SAP system, S/4HANA or Business Suite for HANA. And at that point, you can reconnect the archive to your HANA database, your S/4HANA database, i.e. you can still access your archive data within your new S/4HANA system. It's an important point that you can reconnect it. So none of this activity up here, and depending on when you finally decide to move S/4HANA, is down to you. You have control. You're not losing control of where your data is. Okay, so you've done that initial lowering your total cost of ownership, and then you've mitigated a huge risk, because that migration, for wherever you're going from to, less data, less business partners to set up, all sorts of reasons why you've done that archiving, which helps that migration into S/4HANA, and reduces the amount of time you may have to bring the system down. All sorts of benefits of reducing that size. And that's why we'd always recommend you do a right sizing. So that's the second brownfield option. The third option is what we call greenfield. Now, there's always some confusion what we mean by greenfield. Now, this is a greenfield SAP system, not a greenfield hardware solution, which can sometimes confuse. So we're talking here that we're going to build a new HANA system, and we're only going to move over into the operational data that we need to run in the new S4 HANA system, open stock, open orders, etc., etc. So the process is slightly different. So you've got your original system here. What we're now doing is saying, okay, this whole of the old SAP system is now essentially legacy. It's no longer, it's still there, but it's read-only. And all you've done is you've created a new S4 HANA system over here, which has got all your active data in it. Okay, but it's like, okay, but I'm running two SAP systems, running my new shiny S4 HANA system. I've also got an old ECC system over here, still going to have the same amount of basis support, still going to need the same amount of hardware to manage it, etc., etc. So what we then say is okay, what do you want to do with that? How do you reduce that total cost of ownership? So the next thing we would already recommend is you decommission it, and you can use our SAP ILM system decommissioning, and you put it into what's called ILM retention warehouse. Okay, now, and then that can be reconnected into your S4 HANA system to access that data within the SAP retention warehouse. So you've got the essentially those two ways, best of both worlds. You do lose some functionality, obviously moving over to here. But essentially, the big gain is the fact is that you've lost this old SAP expensive SAP system. You've moved it into new technology, and you've either moved it into your new DC or you've moved it into the cloud. Again, it's obviously an optimal way of doing it. So that's sort of the three scenarios that we would, and ILM can support all those scenarios. That's the key message as regards to a solution. It will work in all those three situations. Okay. So, has anybody got any questions on that, or anything I need to explain in a little bit more detail?
None coming through on chat.
Okay. So it just gives me an opportunity to have a little drink, as you've heard me rattling away. Okay, so we're now going to dive into a little bit about GDPR and POPI, and just help you understand better the functionality which is available to you within the standard SAP ILM solution. So hopefully I've got a colleague of mine, Anya. Are you on the call? Hello, Anya. If you're talking, Anya, you are on mute. Michelle, has Anya communicated with you at all to say that she's on the call?
No, I'll just, if you carry on, Graham, I will.
Okay, I'll try and carry on. It's not my area of expertise, so apologies for that.
Graham, do you want to jump onto mine and then we'll come back when Anya's on the call?
Yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea, Paul. Thanks for that. That's a save my bacon probably, because it's not really my area of expertise. So let me just what I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump out of the presentation one moment, and I'm going to move down to talk about content management and extended ECM, which is going to be covered off by my colleague Paul Shaft. So I'll control, Paul. Shall I? And you tell me when you want me to move on to the next slide. Okay.
Yeah.
No problem at all. Okay. Next slide.
Okay.
Over to you, Paul.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Right, I'm going to talk a bit about unstructured data. What ILM primarily came from is the management of the structured SAP data. So that's your business transactional data you have in SAP. On top of that, most businesses have some sort of documents that support their business processes and are needed. So they may be on paper, they may be electronic, but most of the things that we need to think about when we're thinking about our electronic data, we need to think about when we talk about our structured data, which is what Graham's just been talking about, and the unstructured data. So what we're going to talk about here is sort of the life cycle, the things we need to think about for the structured data, and how OpenText extended ECM can help us with that in our SAP environment. So as time has gone on, regulations on businesses have increased. So what we're allowed to keep and what we need to keep has changed. We need to keep a lot more data for audit purposes, for compliance purposes, and we need to destroy a lot more data quicker because it's personal data that we don't have a business need to keep, and it's identifying that data and managing that data. And if we don't get this right as a business, then we can get quite heavily fined, or the regulators can come and sort of sanction us. So we just need to think about what we're keeping, why we're keeping it, and making sure that we're remaining all our unstructured documents. They could be video files, they could be sound files, they could be PDF files, they could be paper files, but we need to manage those in such a way that we're keeping them when we need to, and we're keeping them because we have a legitimate need to keep them. So if we can move on, please, Graham. Okay, right. So a typical life cycle of any data we have in our business, I'm going to talk primarily about the unstructured documents, is we capture that data. So that could be an electronic document, it comes in on an email, it could be an EDI-based document that comes through, it could be paper that we scan, and when we capture it, we need to index it so that we can find it and locate it. And typically that indexing might take the form of maybe some OCR on a scanned document, or someone going in, putting in some metadata fields to describe what the document is. So it could be classifying it as an invoice document, or it could be classifying it as, you know, HR related, or it could be classifying it as related to a particular customer or a particular vendor. And as part of that classification, we normally identify what type of business data it is and what the typical life cycle of that data is going to be. So is it financial data? So is it going to follow on our financial model? Is it HR data? So we need to look at, you know, training records and personal, you know, job application data and managing that. So we'll define a life cycle for the document types, the types of data, and that's what the classification of the data will do. Once we've captured the data, we're going to use it. And we might use it for a short period, or we might need to use it for a long period. And that usage could be, I'm actively referring to the document. I might need to update it if it's a living document. So if it's a commercial contract, for example, we're going to, as we negotiate the contract, it will go through a number of iterations. We need to keep those for reference until we get to the final one. And then it becomes a reference document, or reference data. So it will be something that we keep until we're finished with it, but it's referenced. So typically what we would do is we would manage the usage of that data. We control the access to the data so that only people who have a need to access it can access it. And where necessarily we audit that access so that we know who's been accessing it and when they've been accessing it, so that if there is a problem, we've got that audit trail. And then the final stage of the life cycle is we need to destroy the data. So again, based on our business rules that we've identified the type of data, how long we need to keep it, we need to think about, again, is this data subject to a legal case or a legal, so we need to place it on hold so we can't destroy it? Do we need to keep some of the data but redact other parts of it because we don't have a need or a right to that data, although we are needing to hold other parts of the data? So we need to think about, when it comes to destruction, is it complete destruction, or is it just particular parts of the data that need to be destroyed, or is it a case of it's part of a litigation, so we need to hold on to that data just for a bit longer while that case completes, and then we can destroy it separately. And what extended ECM does is it brings all the control that SAP ILM does to your structured SAP data to your unstructured documents and data. So it gives us the ability to classify the data. It gives us the ability to monitor and control the access to the data, and it gives us the ability to manage the destruction of the data and the legal find and legal holds for the data. So moving on, Graham. Okay, so we've got some standard rules we need to think about here for maintaining compliance for all data, and these apply to both the ILM data and the unstructured documents. So data should only be kept if it is required, and it should only be used for the purpose it has been acquired for. So if you've got someone's personally identifiable information, so their date of birth, their address, their full name, their social security number, and you've acquired it for the reason of their employment, then you can't use that as part of a sales and marketing campaign. So you need to think about, why have I acquired it? What rights have I got to the data to use it? In some cases, you might have a standard form where you need to redact the information on the form. So you might need to have an employment form, for example, where you've captured all that personal information, but when it's going out to the line manager might not need to see some of it, so we might need to redact it. So we need to think, are we protecting that information on a need-to-know basis, and the person who needs to know it has that legitimate need for it? And then finally, the final bit is, in order to maintain that compliance, we need to make sure that we destroy the data when the business no longer has the need to keep the data for the purpose it was originally captured for. So again, we need to make sure that we are being compliant with our needs for data retention. But of course, that destruction also needs is the data subject to hold for some reason? Is it part of a case or something like that? So we just need that ability in there as well. So before I go on, are there any questions, Michelle?
Yes, we have a couple, Paul. This one's more on the compliance side of things, but so a company cannot have customer data from long ago, like customers from 1990.
That is very regional and country specific. So normally speaking, the governments will specify how long you can keep this information. If it's business to business information, then a lot of the destruction and compliance rules aren't quite so heavily enforced as a business to consumer relationship model. Generally speaking, the consumers have more rights than the businesses to have their data destroyed, and there's more legal compliance. You would need to talk to your legal department to confirm whether or not a particular scenario is valid in your legal jurisdiction. I'm not an expert on South African law, unfortunately, so I can't answer the specific question, but I know within Europe, if I'm a business selling to a consumer, I can't keep that data for 20 years or 30 years unless they are still an active customer and I've got their permission to still keep the data.
Thanks, Paul. And another.
Okay. Is there any others, or should we move on?
Yes, just one more. Can
Yep.
extended ECM be used with Microsoft SharePoint?
Yes, extended ECM, as well as linking to SAP, it can be linked to Microsoft SharePoint. So you can have you can be sitting in your native SharePoint website, and you will see SAP data taken from your S4 or your ECC system directly presented into that SharePoint view, and that could be something like your customer master data, or it could be your I don't know, vendor contracts data. So any documents held in ECM can be seen in SharePoint. Any SAP transactional data can also be seen in SharePoint, and anything held in SharePoint can also be seen the other way. So it is a two-way bi-directional link. Okay, is that everything for the moment, Michelle, or shall we move on?
Yes, thanks, Paul. That's great. If you move on now.
Right. So, OpenText Extended ECM. It's integrated, as we've said, with SAP. It's integrated with the Microsoft Suite, and it's integrated with some of the other things. So it's not just S4, for example. It's integrated into SuccessFactors. So you've got that ability. It's integrated with Salesforce. So there's a number of other applications. So it is a transparent, dynamic exposing of application data from one environment to another, so we can mix structured and unstructured data from different platforms using it. primarily in SAP, it's typically used with your S4 environment, but as I say, you can use it with SuccessFactors to hold all your HR related documentation, and it's fully integrated with that. And it supports the full life cycle management for our documents. So this is from the point that it's we capture the data right through to the management of the data, through change management, through to disruption. And we've got full searching. So it does have the ability, we can do full text searching, we can do fuzzy searching on the text to find documents, and that search can be across the content of the data as well as the structured metadata that comes from SAP. So for example, you might have a folder that you are linked to. That folder that you're seeing in Extended ECM may have SAP sales orders, purchase orders, etc., in there. So that's what we're doing. It's giving all that in free integration between the two platforms for your structured and unstructured data. Okay, moving on, Graham. Right, so as I say, I can take my SAP business transactional data and I can make it available to my OpenText ECM users or my extended ECM users in SharePoint, and that's exactly what it does. And we can do the vice versa. So I can take the documents I've got in extended ECM and just make them available in the SAP client to the end user, so they can dynamically go, I'm looking at my customer master, I can see all the contracts, I can see all the purchasing specifications, everything document related to that customer is there, everything related. And within the ECM environment, I've got all my documents, but I can also see credit limits, order history, that's all available. So that's there. And it gives me security, so I can manage the security of access to the data and the documents in both environments. So I can have a single security model that controls my access to the data, which is all grouped together and related. And then, as we've said already, it allows us to manage the structured, the retention on the documents. Okay, if we can move on, please, Graham. What I've got here is I've got a couple of slides that show what it looks like. So in this example, what I'm doing is I'm sitting in my SAP business client and I'm looking in this case at a vendor, and then against that vendor I have some folders in my ECM solution, and I can see those folders from within SAP, and I can navigate and see the documents I'm authorized to see in those folders, so that within the SAP client I'm seeing my unstructured documents and data. So if we can move on to the next one, Graham, which is the last one of these. What this is doing is this is going the other way. So I'm sat in my extended ECM web browser, and not only can I see some documents, but I can see the SAP metadata related to this folder. So this folder links to my vendor, and in there I'm seeing things like the vendor name, the address. That's all pulling through straight from the SAP customer master record into my extended ECM data. So it's not a characteristic I'm manually maintaining. I've got those attributes coming straight off the SAP system, and it's all dynamic. It's all ECM reads from SAP, SAP reads from ECM. There's no interface between the two. It's direct access between the two environments. Okay, just before we move on, are there any questions on extended ECM?
You're okay there, Paul, I think.
Okay, is Anya on, or do you want me to continue?
Anya is on.
Anya, you on?
Yes, I'm on. Hi.
All right, shall we jump back and do the GDPR POPI bit, and then I'll finish off
Yeah.
with vendor invoice management.
Okay, let's do that. Let me just 2 seconds. I just need to jump out of here, roll back. Thanks for joining, Anya. Sorry for the
Thank you.
confusion on the timing. So like I was saying earlier, ladies and gentlemen, Anya's our resident POPI expert, and well, not necessarily POPI expert, but general data protection. And like I was saying earlier, ILM has, because of this, has built some specific functionality with ILM, which is essentially, most of it is free to use when it's to do with personal information only. And just wanted Anya to dive into some more details in regards to what that functionality is. So Anya, what I'll do is I'll control, and when you're ready to move on to the next slide, I shall just say next slide, or I'm ready to move on, and I'll move the slide on for you. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Graham. Great. Hi, everyone. So GDPR, or as it's known in South Africa, POPI. So obviously I have been reading up on POPI, and POPI is definitely very, very similar to GDPR. So the big thing is personal data. First of all, what is personal data? So personal data have specific identifiers, for example, the obvious ones, like a person's name, their address, their area, their online identifiers, their health information, financial information, and so on. There are a few things that are really important to remember, though, when talking about identifying POPI relevant data on your system. So when you're thinking of address data, don't just think of work address data. Personal address data, your home address, is also relevant. Your cell phone number, that again, if you have a work cell phone or a personal cell phone, both are relevant and both are considered POPI relevant or personal data. Okay. You can see that the top paragraph is a direct excerpt from Article 4 of the GDPR. But I've put in the blue paragraph below that, which is more user-friendly. And again, it's just one of those important things to remember when talking about POPI data. And this is the qualifiers of the directly and the indirectly, and that I reference to. So all this paragraph really explains is that you may have a lot of tables on your SAP system that just contain personnel numbers. Now that in itself is not necessarily POPI relevant, because if someone has access to that table, so they have the authorization to access the table, and they see that list of personnel numbers, it is still not enough for them to identify who that person is in the organization if they don't have any other access. Okay, so again, there are exceptions, of course, but that is the general rule. And so when personal data becomes POPI relevant or GDPR relevant is when there is a second identifier. So say you're logging on, you see a personnel number and you see a cell phone number. That in itself will be enough to identify someone, and that's when it becomes a POPI issue. All right, next slide, please.
Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so this slide really just explains on a high level the functionality available to you when using SAP ILM. You can see that I've split it. On the bottom left, you've got the functionality for HR data, and then on the top right for the non-HR data, because ILM functionality is very different for the two. So let's start with the bottom left, which is simpler. So for the HR data, HR payroll data, ILM allows you to delete HR data, but it does not allow you to archive it or block it. Okay, and by blocking we mean basically making it invisible to the end user. So that's an important, really important thing to remember. ILM does not allow you to archive it. ILM-enabled archiving objects exist for most info types, but some are not supported. Okay, so there are still a few gaps in ILM, but very, very few. I think we've all been doing this for a long time. Our colleagues will attest, and especially for the HR, there are literally many hundreds of objects for each info type, with only a few gaps remaining. All right. Most delete all records of a particular data type, but some retain the last entry. So for example, addresses, if you delete address history from an employee, and that can be an active employee or a terminated employee, it will retain the last address entry. Okay. Again, most delete all records. There are just these few exceptions remaining. Then I'm going to jump to the last line before I come back to the second last. So it is possible to set legal holds on human resources data to protect it or prevent it from being deleted, even once it has passed its retention period, if it is required for legal cases or for other reasons. So let's just imagine that there is a court case against the company by an ex-employee, and you have a retention period, a retention policy in place on ILM, and let's say that your retention policy is 5 years and the person left just over 5 years ago. What you don't want is for your ILM jobs to then kick off overnight, for you to come back and find that all of the personal data for that ex-employee has disappeared, has been deleted off the system, when it's actually still required for a court case or for any other legal reason. So SAP has very cleverly offered this functionality of putting a legal hold on a specific personal number on the system, and it then protects all of the data for that personal number, and it overrides anything that you configure in the ILM retention policies. Okay, once the said court case is over, you could then lift the legal hold on the personal number, and that ex-employee's data is then deleted in the next ILM run. Okay, if I now jump to the second last, so the ILM object, HRPA underscore PRNR. So this is a newish ILM object from SAP. I say newish, it was offered in October 2018. And this deletes a leaver's personnel number, including all of their personal data, via a two-step process, so an approval process. What is remarkable here is that you now have two approaches that you can take for HR data. So you can say that you want to delete all data for leavers, as one example, by using this HRP underscore PRNR. So you can look at, apply strategy, one strategy for leavers. But then from a POPI perspective, you could also review the data that your existing employees have. So for example, if you have a 15 or 20-year-old SAP system, do you really need to be keeping 15 years of address data for active employees? So if the answer is no, then ILM allows you to do housekeeping as such and to make your active user database more POPI compliant. So if it is not needed for business or legal requirements, then you could delete all, say, any address data older than 5 or 10 years and have a cleaner system, a more compliant system. Okay. On the top right-hand side, the ILM functionality for the non-HR data. So this is where ILM gets very, very smart. It enables you to block and delete business partner, customer, and vendor master data. So the data is actually blocked, so it's made invisible to end users as soon as the business activities for which the data is needed are completed and the residence time for this data has elapsed. After this time, only users who are assigned additional, and they are additional ILM specific authorizations, can display the block data. And then after the retention period for the data expires, the personal data is deleted completely so that it can no longer be retrieved. So the graphic on the left explains that, gives an overview of that. But I think just another important thing to remember in terms of that functionality is that it is pretty sophisticated. So what you can actually do is, let's again just say that you have a 20-year-old SAP database and you have 20 years worth of employee vendor data on the system. Now there may be a business or legal requirement to keep, say, 15 years of that data. So that's great, you can delete 5 years. But then what about your existing users who have authorization to typically view that data online, the live data? Is it a requirement for them? Do they really need to then still display 15 years of online employee vendor data? So if it's a nice to have and not a business requirement, then you can implement the blocking. And you can implement this blocking through, as I said, the authorizations, but also authorization layers. So you can then further review the audience and say, well, your auditors will always need to be able to view all employee vendor data on the system. So they should not be blocked at all. So that's one authorization layer. The second authorization layer is saying, well, your middle and senior management may need to display, let's say, 10 years worth of blocked employee vendor data. So you can give them that access. And that would be the second layer. And then the third layer would be to say your end users who, well, let's just say they would only need to be able to display, 1 to 3 years worth of employee vendor data. They would be the third level of authorizations. Okay. Are there any questions on this functionality?
No, not.
Okay.
Thanks, Anya.
Great. Next slide, please. So this again is just to touch on the importance of data being business complete and also the importance of considering data dependencies. So again, splitting it into HR and non-HR. So your HR archiving objects can mostly be implemented independent of one another. So if you're looking at deleting address data, for example, or travel data, you can implement them independently without any corruption of data, for example, or any inconsistencies of data. Okay, that's quite simple. Again, of course, there are exceptions, but very few. Now, the non-HR archiving objects, most of them need to be implemented in a specific sequence. And even if not all of them are implemented, the blocking and deletion programs will check that all related data is business complete. Now, the diagram that you see below is a network diagram of the SAP system, and it shows the SAP standard dependencies that you need to consider when you want to archive, so block, archive, or delete customer master data. You can see that it is quite a busy diagram, so I'm not too sure how legible it is to you. But what this shows is that before you want to archive customer master data, you need to have a look at this entire diagram and identify, do you use document logs? If yes, is the data in that business complete? Moving on, do you use deliveries? Is the data that you want to archive, the corresponding data on the customer master side, is that business complete on the delivery side? Okay, so if you had to implement the customer master data ILM object on its own, you would have a very, very low success rate. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So these slides are really just the last few slides just to illustrate the data deletion aspect of the functionality of ILM. So this slide shows the functionality offered by that newish deletion object that I spoke about that was offered in 2018 called HRPA_PRNR. So you can see that you can actually upload, you can identify personnel numbers that you want to delete, so the entire personnel record. You upload that into this variant, and then you actually submit that for approval. Okay, so this is the clever thing, you submit it for approval. Then an approver who needs to have a specific ILM authorization to approve the request will then log on, review the list of personnel numbers that you've submitted for deletion, and they then have the power to either approve the request or delete the request, reject the request. If they've approved the request, the personnel numbers and records are still not deleted off the system, because you, the person who has submitted the request, needs to then log back on, and only then will you be able to physically delete the personnel number and personnel records of the system. And of course, this also generates an audit log on the system, which you can export, and I say export, and let's say export and save into a password protected file for POPI compliance. But it does produce this audit report that you can see, or these audit logs that you can see on the slide. Okay, next slide, please. And this is the second strategy or approach that you can take for your HR data. So this is the one where instead of deleting entire personnel records of leavers, you can look at your existing employees and say, well, actually, you know, we have 20 years of address data, we only need 10. So with this one, you would actually implement a specific ILM object for a specific infotype. In this case, it's infotype 6 for address data. And this again just shows, it gives you the screenshots of how you would implement this ILM object, how you would identify test data, and how you would then delete the test data. So very importantly, when you implement this ILM object, the personnel number, of course, does not get affected. All the other infotype data that they have, you know, salaries, travel data, any other infotype data remains as is. And it would only then delete the address data from that personnel number older than the retention period. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so you can see this is just a continuation of it. On the right-hand side, the screenshot shows an actual ILM policy. And you can see that this policy actually allows you also to apply far more than just blanket retention periods. So again, this just shows the sophistication or the levels that you have for ILM. So when you're looking at address data, you don't just need to look at all address data and decide on one retention policy for all address data. If you have specific personnel areas that you need to apply different retention periods for, ILM allows you to do that. And so the screenshot on the right-hand side just shows you a typical ILM policy, an ILM retention policy, with different retention periods for different personnel areas. Okay, thanks. Next slide. And again, this is just the last slide. And this just shows what the personnel entry would then look like after the deletion entry, after the deletion job is run for this specific ILM object. And again, as mentioned before, you can see that the personnel number is still there. All the other infotype data is still there. Only the old address data, the old address data has been deleted. That's it. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Anya. No questions at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anya. Okay, so what we'll do is now is I'm going to go back to Paul. Just one moment. I just need to jump out of here, and we're going to go and discuss vendor invoice management, or VIM as it is sometimes known as. Paul, are you there?
Yes, right. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over one of the OpenText business solutions that is quite commonly used with SAP. It can be sold either by OpenText directly or it's on the SAP site price list. Slightly different names, but it's the same product. It's essentially a vendor invoice management solution. So this is the management of our accounts payable invoices as part of our purchase to pay business procedure. So it's not involved in the purchasing side, so the creation of purchase orders and good receipting as such, although it does interface in with those. It's aimed from the point that your vendor supplies you with a invoice asking for payment for goods or services that they have delivered. So if we can continue on to the next slide, please, Graham.
I just wanted to add one thing. The other reason why we added this into today's presentation was specifically because of the situation with COVID-19, and we've had a lot of customers in the UK and other geographical locations who have realized that they need something like this in a situation like we are today. If they have paper invoices coming in to headquarters which need to be opened and then need to be put into a system to be paid, it becomes very difficult within a lockdown situation. So that was the main reason why we added this into today's presentation. Sorry, Paul, I shall carry on now.
Okay, thank you. Right, so as Graham mentioned, vendor invoice management, it takes the paper-centric process that was the traditional paper invoice received in the post, opened by the AP department, keyed into the SAP or the ERP system, sent out to managers for approval. It takes that whole process and it automates it for us. So the first thing we want to do, certainly in this COVID environment that everyone's working under today, is we want to take our invoice documents and wherever possible get away from the paper as quickly as possible. So it does support documents coming in. They can come in through EDI, they can come in through email, they can come in through paper. If they're coming in through EDI, that's nice and easy because the electronic document already has all the fields nicely split out, and it just maps them to our SAP fields and creates the documents in SAP with all the right values. If the invoice comes in through email or paper, then it's normally a flat form, and we need to somehow intelligently extract the invoice data so that we're not sitting there typing off the piece of paper. And the system does that, and it does that using an OCR-based solution that will intelligently scan the document, and it extracts the key pieces of information for us. So we get the invoice number, the invoice date, the total amount, the net amount, the tax amounts at a header level, and a couple of other fields, but it also extracts or can extract the line details. So each line on the invoice can come out as a separate line on the invoice document that we create in SAP. So we receive the document from our supplier. That document comes in and we then place it to the second phase, which is the data extraction phase. So that's us trying to intelligently extract the data. And then what we want to do is make sure that the invoice makes logical sense, and if needed, it goes out through an approval process. So we do a validation review step on it, and we automate that to some extent. So, you know, if it's a purchase order logistics-based invoice, we will confirm, does the purchase order number exist in our system? If it's a receipted item, have we received the goods and created the goods receipt item or the service entry sheet? And we do that automatically so that, you know, the AP department don't have to go and do that. The system goes and does it for us. So we're optimizing the throughput and making our AP department better, because what we're trying to do is make the people more productive and less manual processes in there. Once we've got an invoice, if there's a query on it, so if it's a non-logistics invoice, so this is pure AP, it's coming in, being processed by AP, no purchase orders to support it, it's going to have to go through some sort of management review and approval process before we pay it. So in these scenarios, the system will say, oh, this invoice is for this cost center, so therefore I need to route it out to this manager for approval, or these managers for approval. And it sends an electronic copy of the invoice out to the manager, so they can see the copy of the invoice and they can do the review and approval. If it's a logistics-based invoice, it still goes through that approval cycle, but if we've done the goods receipt and the invoice matches the purchase order that they quote on it, then it's already pre-approved because the purchase order has gone through the approval cycle, so we don't need to reapprove it. It will approve it automatically and post it. If, however, they've invoiced us for 10, but we've only said we received 5, it will send it out and say, well, you know, what do you want to do? Do you want to ask for a credit? Do you want to receipt the other 5 because someone entered the wrong number? And the system then routes it to the right person in the business to make the informed decision to process the document further. And then once everything's okay with the document, it's freed up for payment on the ledger, and it goes out through our normal payment run process. As part of this process, we can do some reporting. So we can look at our open items, invoices due for payment. We can look at, we can do some key process indicator analysis. So we can say which vendors are consistently sending us wrong invoices, which vendors are consistently billing early. You know, are we meeting our payment terms on all our invoices? Have we got a particular member of staff who needs some additional training because they're taking longer than average to respond to a typical query? So we've got a number of reports and analytics that we can run, and it gives us enhanced cash flow reporting from the point of view of what's due, from its visibility of life, as well as what's also posted in our ledgers. And then within the program, we can start at a very high level, and then we can drill down within the system. And there's a little bit of supplier self-service in here. So, you know, we can present a portal out to our suppliers so that they can go and have a look. What invoices have we got in our system for them? What's currently under query? What's waiting for payment? So we can, again, provide that service out to our vendors if we need to. So if we can move on, please, Graham. Okay. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to accelerate our business process. What I've talked about from the point of view of invoices, we can also do a little bit on order processing, which is just coming in the latest release. But what we're trying to do is speed the process through the business, not go to the old way of working where, you know, AP would receive the invoice, photocopy it, put it in a van to send it to another office, then the manager would review it, sign it, put it in another van and send it back to AP, and then they would pick it up. So we're trying to optimize our business processes here. We're trying to minimize delays in our processing so we can maximize our early payment discounts, we can eliminate any late fees that we need to do. So we're actually optimizing our cash flow in the business as well as optimizing our business process, and again increasing productivity. You know, if AP get an invoice and they have to go and ring a line manager every time they get a query, why don't you just send the invoice out to the line manager and make it their responsibility, and then AP is going to them, and they get visibility of all the issues and all the problems they need to do. And again, we're making sure that the business processes we have for purchase to pay, they're followed, they're compliant. So if we have a no PO, no pay policy, we confirm every invoice has a PO on it, and we define rules and validate based on that. Okay, are there any questions, Michelle?
Yes, there are, Paul. Okay, so first one, signing invoices. Is it e-sign, advanced electronic signature, co-sign or core sign?
So this is signing the electronic invoice that we've scanned, I assume. And then it would be, we can add an electronic signature of the scanned file. And that would be signed in there. If it's an invoice that is emailed to us with a scanned signature, so with an electronic signature on it, then that signature would remain in the file.
Thanks,
Hopefully
Paul.
that's answered the question.
Great. And second one, does Vim have RPA built in to assist with capturing invoices instead of just using OCR so it can reduce workload?
Is only using OCR technology to extract the data. If it's coming in as electronic documents, it's coming in as an EDI based transfer, then it's direct field mapping. Otherwise it's a pure OCR engine that it's using. But it's a rules based OCR engine rather than a forms based OCR engine that it's using.
Okay, thanks,
I
Paul.
think that's answered that question.
Typically, how many invoices do you need to process a vendor invoice management? Need to process for vendor invoice management to be cost effective. Sorry.
Okay. Typically, this varies client to client. In our experience in Europe, if you've got less than 25,000 invoices a year, so that's about 2,000 invoices a month, the cost of the deployment project won't repay itself in a cost-effective manner for a Vim solution. Once you get over the 25,000 invoices, it pays back relatively quickly in cost savings and business savings. So hopefully that one's answered that one. If we can then move on, if there's no other questions.
No, that's it. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, so what this slide is trying to show is actually quite a busy slide, and I don't know whether everyone can see all the detail on it, but what it's trying to show is for the purchase to pay and the order to cash processes that are supported within the invoice management product, which parts of those process can the system help with. So if we look at this, anything that's got a blue circle on it, that requires some sort of human intervention, and if it's got a green circle, then it's fully automatic, so the system automates that process for you. What we're trying to do here is sort of show, you know, the typical process flow from inquiry through to analytics and payment, where it's making the saving in that process and where we're getting that those cost savings and automations to the business process. As we can see, there's a number of key points where we're actually making a significant saving on some of the particularly painful points for the relevant departments. So if we can move on, please. Okay, what we've got here is just a couple of slides of what Vim looks like before we roll up to the end of this. So you've got invoice management approval. As I mentioned before, if it can automatically approve it because it's got a purchase order that's pre-approved, the goods receipt has been completed, so the invoice matched the receipts matched the purchase order, then there's no need for an approval process. However, in this ever mobile and distance age that we live in, we want to be, where we've got a query or where we need action, we want to send it out to a mobile device, and so there's a mobile web client or mobile client that we can deploy onto our managers and approvers mobile devices, whether that's their tablet, whether that's their phone, so that they can actually see see what they need to review, action it, approve it, reject it, query it, all on their mobile device while they're on the go. So they don't need to be in the office connected to their desktop PC to do this. So we're just allowing that mobility client as well as that traditional, laptop-based, desktop-based SAP client out to the users. And if we can move on again, please, Graham.
Just have a question, Paul.
Yeah.
Is Vim automated to assist with credit notes, disputes, and how is this handled by the system, especially in the service industry?
Okay. Yeah. The inbound credit notes is supported by the system. It also supports pro forma invoices. So if you've got an invoice coming in, it detects that it's an invoice, or it detects if it's a credit note, it reads it and it detects it's a credit note. So credit notes go through the normal process and the same validation rules and as an invoice. In SAP terminology, a credit note can be thought as a negative invoice, so it all follows the same process flow, and it's fully supported. Down payments, pro forma invoices, they're also supported if you need to have that functionality as well. Okay. Hopefully that's that one answered.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay, no problem. And then we've got a screen here. This is what your typical back office user would look like. So this is your account payable within the SAP environment. On the left-hand side of the screen, you've got all the electronic extracted data, metadata processes that you can run. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got a copy of the invoice documents that's been received. And what you can do is you can sort of click in fields on the left-hand side and then select them in the right-hand side to actually populate the data if it's not correct. So, but this is just showing what the user interface looks like for a back-end user as opposed to a manager who was on the previous slide who would be doing approval. Okay, and then moving on. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is the last one. This is sort of the self-service side of it. So as a supplier, I can go in, I can see this is my supplier. This is an overview of what's in process, and this is in there. This is not a full supplier portal. It is functionality you can use as part of your supplier portal. So it's the invoice handling side, the purchase order side, not so much, but this is more to do with the invoices and the payments, so that they can see where their invoices are, where the payments are, where they're being queried, if they're being queried. So it's that side of life rather than the procurement purchase order going out side. That would be a different environment, but these are just views that you can present out as part of a wider supplier portal if you want to. Okay, any other questions, Michelle?
No, that's it for the moment. If anybody'd like to ask a question, please do go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll hand back to Graham now then, and then we'll just finish off with the lessons learned session.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, I just wanted to just summarize and sum up some of the things that we've been talking about, certainly around data management, POPI, etc., and some of the lessons learned that we over the last 20 years of doing this. So I just run through these and give you some examples. So obviously, I think it's probably like any project, don't buy it, just more you can chew. I think certainly from an archiving perspective and any data management perspective, start small and grow from there. The reason why we would always suggest that is that and it probably comes further down as well. You need to bring the business on the journey and get their confidence in regards to, like I said earlier, their data's not going into a drawer somewhere that they're never going to be able to find it, that they need to be able to get the information back. Start simple, like I just mentioned, get them used to data management. Don't manage the data by committee. It's best to keep a small focused team. If you've got a records management department, they're normally the key to a successful, any successful data management. The same approach applies to record management as it does to data management. Take the users on the journey, like I just said, and make sure you meet your strategy requirements. That's your key deliverable to the business, is that you hit your strategy requirements. So when we touched on the POPI side, you don't want to be caught doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. Just make sure you cover those off before you go any further. Like I said, and I've used it a lot today, and I'm guilty of this. Try not to use the word archive. Talk about data management, regulatory management, etc. And the other part is that data management projects do tend to move forward at not normally the normal project life cycle, i.e. they have a specific start time, they have a specific finish time. They do, as the nature of the business changes, the nature of the data management changes. Also, one of the big alarm bells when you're doing any data management project is that if you've got a 15-year-old system and you've got to get rid of potentially maybe 12 years worth of data, you can't do it overnight. It does take time, and you may have peaks and troughs within the year or maybe 2 years that you have to slowly move that data out of the system. So they do start and stop, and always getting the architecture right first time. I think is pertinent to OpenText as well, and any solution you build is build what you really do want at the end of the day. Don't and actually we've had experience of this. Is recent on a recent project, the customer decided that they would have a different type of storage solution that they were going to have in the final solution for the production system, and we had some critical issues created by that. So don't fudge it. In other words, keep it as you want it. Residency time, retention times, obviously they're the key to that. Like I said earlier, get those defined early, get them agreed early. That drives the strategy forward. Don't manage without a strategy. Make sure it becomes a living document. We always develop, as part of a project, a living document called the blueprint, which essentially is your data management strategy going forward. Business complete transactions, Anya mentioned it as regards to the dependencies between data and their completeness of being able to archive it. Yeah, we've had many organizations who've got terabytes of data. None of it would archive because it's not business complete. You have to work through and get SAP to know that it's business complete so you can archive it. Data destruction policy, again, that's obviously goes back to residency and retention. Don't necessarily just get tempted just to do technical archiving. Even that's important, but you need to get onto the functional side as well. Users need to be confident that they're getting the data back when they want it and how they want it. Like I said earlier, making sure you've got archive-enabled transactions, and putting data management into the BAU process. A lot of projects, and we've had a lot of experience of this, where you do a data management project or an archiving project. It runs for 6 to 9 months. You get all the data out, and then we get a call 5 years later saying, can you come and do it again? Because the data's just grown and filled that space that we took out because there's no ongoing data management. Turn on your DVM solution manager. It helps you manage your data going forward, gives you lots of good information. That's always highly recommended, that one. And obviously document. like we said earlier, keep that strategy well managed, keep the strategy developing as and when the business changes, when you acquire organizations, etc., etc. And testing is, like anything, is very important with any of this. So there's just some lessons learned to finish off. So that's covered all the material that we wanted to cover. We've kept within the 2 hours, which was our primary goal. And yeah, thank you. And have you got any questions, or have we got any questions, Michelle, that you want to cover off now?
No more coming, Graham. If you'd like to ask, you can put it into chat now. Doesn't look like it, Graham.
Okay.
I'm going to hand Wilco now to close.
Yeah, shall I hand back over to the South African SAP user group, as you were the driving force behind this session? Hello? Lizzie, do you want to add anything?
Oh, okay, from our side, this is Marco speaking. I'm from the Proceed Group Africa side. I just want to say thank you everyone for joining us. It's really good to see we had a very good turnout. I hope the session has helped you and it has filled you with a lot of knowledge. Thank you very much. And then from all of us, including the Proceed Group team, thank you very much for joining. I think that's it from my side, and everybody can look forward to our next session that we're going to have. Please just be on the lookout with all the communications. Otherwise, thank you, everyone.
Cool. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye all.